Hello, good morning, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are listening to damradio.com/live. Coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. It is Monday. It is President's Day. And I think maybe I'm on the wrong day. Who the hell knows? No, I'm on the right day. It's January's MLK Day, right? In February. I can't believe my civics are that far off. If you were listening, perhaps you heard the new edition on Friday of our new radio program. It's probably not going to be just me. There should be other participants and interviews and stuff like that. I still have my press credentials and an interview little kit for it's pretty cool for my phone and whatnot, where I can go out and interview people, and I intend to do some of that in a little bit, and like I did when I was in Russia. It was pretty cool. I might even have bought it over there. Can't remember. But it's a pretty cool little get-up. At any rate, Friday, we put out the first episode of our Civic Outlaws podcast. And you can find that. I'm trying to create go to civicoutlaws.com/podcast. I'm not sure the link is up there yet, so I copied it to my International Flavors site if you'd like to listen to the analysis. Basically, it's a walkthrough of why Civic Outlaws is there. In my typical rambling style, sometimes I go through and do some legal analysis for you. And I put together the a review of the Chevron doctrine, why it was wrong, why it's been overturned by the Supreme Court as it was in 2024, and then why the state of Missouri has codified those changes even more dramatically, and why Civic Outlaws exists. We, here in the United States, do not wish to be the Soviet Union, even though they had a pretty cool theme. There it is. Великая Русь, да здравствует созданной волей народом. We had to learn that. Didn't have to, but we learned it in Russian school. It's pretty cool. At any rate, that's always been my favorite version, is the USSR Army Choir or military choir, and I always liked it. That was the one they always played at parades and whatnot. And anyway, but here we don't want to be the Soviet Union. Hell, I was listening to that, and there's been some great presidents in our history. We've had some. I meant to bring in and forgot. I'm going to put on a song for you. Maybe I'll let the hymn of the Soviet Union play, because sometimes I feel like that's the way we're headed. But I don't want it. I mean, it's unpatriotic, and I'm a patriot. I believe in America. I believe in our ideals. I believe in what our founders intended. And sometimes I look at our government and I think that we're so far off from where we began that I fear for our children. And as a generation, my generation, living through the collapse of the Soviet Union and all of that, to watch the nanny state take over for many, many people is really depressing to me. Now, I don't like it anyway, number one. People talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm one of them. I could lecture on it. People like to believe that Reagan toppled the Soviet Union, and I think he was the catalyst to the final nail in the coffin, but they were on their way out anyway, because go back and study your systems of government, and democracy is supposed to be the be-all, end-all. Okay, there have been attempts at it before. They had senates and people like that in prior eras, people that got to have the speaking of the governor's place below. What they did in Ukraine is imagine a world where the U.S. president appointed each governor, where Donald Trump would come into office, and at the same time he'd get to go, well, all right, well, they have federal systems, right? And these systems collapse on their own weight, federal system. That's just what they do. You need to have independent, I like the loosely held republic is a much better option. Because if in Ukraine, which is true, they get to pick the governor when they come into office, it's what kind of world is that? If all you are is an administrator of the big ticket item, well, that's in my view, it's not necessarily a good view of democracy. Now, there are a lot of structures like that, so I'm not saying it cannot work. And sometimes people want to have the will of the people. I'm not here to tell you which one is. I prefer democracy, but I prefer a clean democracy. I prefer a democracy that is legit, that isn't corrupted by bureaucracy. And if you want to hear about one of the big corrections made by the Supreme Court in 2024, you should go back and listen to my Civic Outlaws case. It's a class on government and how, government is not supposed to be driven by the bureaucrat. And that's the problem, is the bureaucracy. It's not socialism. It's not even communism, although communism, I believe, collapses of its own weight eventually. But there's a decent argument to be made that any government that exceeds its mandate, exceeds its authority, is going to collapse of its own weight. The trouble in a communist system is you don't have the fight from below necessarily, because you have the people get this. They always used to make false statements that everybody got paid the same in a Soviet system and all that. That's not how it worked, and it's not how it works in communism. Now, it would be interesting to see if there was ever a government, and properly, communism truly could work. I remember growing up Mormon, in fact, and going through the bishops' warehouses and stuff like that. The Mormon Church has a huge social presence, as many churches do. I don't know much about the rest of them, but you'd have to. We would go to the canning factories and what do you call it? Donate our time, stuff like that. And it could be a very good system where everybody gets together and takes care of those who can't take care of themselves. The problem becomes is everybody, not everybody. A lot of people are true givers and have that giving spirit, but a lot of people take advantage. And the more you give them, the more they take. And they don't just take, each according to his need. Everybody produces according to their capacity and takes only according to his need. In democracy, that sure as hell isn't the case. Or capitalism, I mean. In capitalism, mine. Do you remember what show is that? Finding Nemo? I always used to love watching that show because it was freaking hilarious. And you would watch the seagulls up there, and one bird would start. They'd see a little, I don't know, a fish, a worm, whatever, and go, mine. And then all the rest of the seagulls go, mine. And instead of like bird sounds, they'd go, mine. It's freaking hilarious. You'd hear them doing that everywhere. Anyway, I'm really on a roll today. I'm just rambling. Sorry about that. But we don't want the Soviet system. The Soviet Union collapsed because of equality, because of... Equality is not the right word, but for lack of a better substitute, there it is. Everybody gets to take, but it shows up in some of their Their stories. One of my favorite Russian movies is called Sluzhebny Roman, which is a office romance, is what it means, and a 2-part, 3-hour kind of a comedy / love story. It's a great movie from I want to say the early 70s, but I could be wrong. I really like the actor in there. He's the same actor that is in Slyokim Padam, which is Have a Nice Bath, and it's a traditionally Christmas time watching. It's a great story, another great love story, and they've even translated it in English in many respects. It was so well received in one of the best movies. It was friggin' hilarious, and they had some great movies back in the good old days of the Soviet Union too. And even there, though, in Sluzhebny Roman, they would make fun of the director of the economic studies business was concerned when she hired a new manager that people were leaving their desks, going shopping. They were taking care of things because when in a market where it's not driven. It wasn't driven by demand. It was driven by supply. And in those markets, you take what you can get. You know, if they're only, and then the jokes the Americans made about them in the 80s were like your Wendy's commercials, where the Wendy's commercial lady would be laughing about how everything's the same and everybody's in these gray outfits, and they would make fun of it. And but you bought what was available, and so they would always have jokes that if a truck pulled up full of watermelons, everybody go out and buy one. That was one of the things in the deal. And they would leave their offices, everybody go out and buy a watermelon, because the system was such that you couldn't, if you wanted a watermelon, you couldn't go to the store and get a watermelon always. Now, the Soviet system had strong pluses too, but those are historic things. People like to think that Ronald Reagan pushed over, collapsed. I think he was the final catalyst by the threat of Star Wars and all of that. But the system was on its own going to collapse anyway. If you don't take care of your internal production and in your how you structure your society and what they get, and give them a mix of the ability, without it being through the sucking up to power through your local communist parties, and kissing the ass of government. They did the same thing that we have to do if we want to get anywhere. Anyway, as we ease into this morning of President's Day, and if you're off work, great. I chose to work today. Yesterday was a beautiful day. I got some things done. I didn't even leave the house except for briefly to cart a load of trash to the dumpster at the office. That's all I did. But the rest of it, I was at home cleaning, sorting. I've been living in squalor for a little bit, and I had to get some work done. So I was not eternally in the office like normal. And so, anyway, I want to get to the big theme of big government. But what I think I'm going to do is get my quotes from Abraham Lincoln out of my office, because I do want to quote some of them to you. And in the meantime, I'm going to play for you my favorite. I won't play the hymn of the Soviet Union, although some of you may like it. It's actually I like the rhythm of that kind of march music and I really like the all-male Soviet Army choir that does that. I always have liked that version. Brings back a lot of memories for me from my Russian school days at the Defense Language Institute in California. So, but in the meantime, I'm kind of I really like music. I like going to concerts. I've told you about the one I went to in, where was that? Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And it cost me $10 to go see, what is his, Paul Tiesto, Paul Van Ness, some really cool people. And I kind of like the dance music, the club sort of things that you see. And so I'm going to play for you whilst I go get my Abraham Lincoln quotes for today, and then we'll ease into the big topics that I have in store for you. I'm going to play my favorite version of One Night in Bangkok. That could be a lot of fun. And here is, was One Night in Bangkok, wasn't it Taco? I don't remember who did One Night in Bangkok. But we're going to play my favorite version, which is more of a club version of One Night in Bangkok. And there you have it, Sam's favorite version of One Night in Bangkok. That's the Vinyl Shakers. And would have loved to see them in concert. However, that has not occurred. At any rate, I don't know, maybe you don't like that here on Damn Radio. Who can tell what sort of customers we have engaging in our custom here at Damn Radio. But that is music a la Sam. That would be me. And I went to get for you my book of Abraham Lincoln, and it's not here. It's I must not have brought it in, but I do have my Presidential Wit and Wisdom book, which covers many presidents, each and every one. We even have some Trumpster. I don't think Biden's in this book. Not only would he not have anything intelligent to say, because these are mostly statements that they said, but I think it ends with, does it end with Barack Hussein Obama? Why do we have to add that? I don't know. I would have swore I had some Trump in here. Well, that's no good. Yep, this book, because I bought it pre the old Trumpster the first time. I've had this book a long time. But I want to share with you some Abraham Lincoln. And if Abraham was a girl, she'd be Babraham Lincoln. Remember that from Wayne's World? Wayne's World. Born February 12 of 1809. Died April 15th on Tax Day, 1865. He was the 16th president. He was a president from 1861 to 65. Was a Republican. And what he said was one of his key statements. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. That's very good. Comment. Character is like a tree and reputation like its shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing. Now that's deep. I like that. The best thing about the future is that it only comes one day at a time. That's a pretty good one from the old Abraham Lincoln. The Lord prefers common-looking people. That is the reason he makes so many of them. I love it. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Do you remember when Bill and Ted did that in their final speech? From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And on days like today, I think it is important that people remember that, people have died for what we have. People are, dying even today. It's not there's always some action going on. That is why I personally say such things I do about the government. It requires people like me to point out stuff. You may not agree with it all. That's okay. You don't have to. That's the beauty of America. I should be able to tell you what I think is wrong. You should be able to say what you think is wrong. And we ought to be able to come up with a consensus. And consensus has been gone for at least the last little while. Pick it. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union is my argument. I'd say it's from the 90s. And so, our mistakes, the biggest ones, have been created in the last 30 years. Of course, I've been an adult during that time. And the other time I only learned about them from history. And, there's some sort of nostalgia in history, so that's not quite fair. But I've lived this. And I'm telling you that I still stand for the proposition that our government isn't supposed to be this way. And the government is supposed to be by the people, for the people. It's for the people, not for, somebody else. That's nonsense. It's not for those that run it, not for those that run it. A government of the people, not the bureaucrats, people. Bureaucrats are not people. You can't be saying, bureaucrats are people too. No, they're not. If they were people, they'd understand other people. So I don't believe they're people. That might be harsh, but no, that's not nice, because that's what people say about Russians. The Ukrainians calling them orcs and stuff like that, and all the bullshit that goes on about that. And we have turned into a world of name callers. And for my part, I know I do it sometimes, but I would, strongly encourage people to be. If that's all you got is name calling, you got nothing. And so, a bureaucrat, that is a real name. I have bad connotations with it, but that's a legitimate thing. You can't, call people. What is a person if he's an asshole? That's not a person. It's an asshole, and the connotation is exactly there, and it's the same thing. He's a stupid. He's just stupid. These are offensive. And we should try not to do those kind of things. And I will try to be better about that, because here's a well-spoken president who would say things like this. You have heard the story about the man who was tarred and feathered and carried out of town on a rail. A man in that crowd asked him how he liked it. His reply was, if it was not for the honor of the thing, he would much rather walk. I always like that one. So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war. He was talking about Harriet Beecher Stowe. Such will be a great lesson of peace, teaching men what they cannot take by election, neither can they take it by war. That's a good one. The central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. When you've got an elephant by the hind leg and he's trying to run away, it's best to let him run. That's a good idea. I think I would like that. I also cheated while the song was playing and made myself some coffee, so pardon. That's good coffee. Let's see. I wish some of you would tell me the brand of whiskey that Grant drinks. I would like to send a barrel of it to my other generals. I love it. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the best hope of earth. Now, that's a good one. When the hour comes for dealing with slavery, I trust I will be willing to do my duty, though it cost my life. And it did. To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. Speak up, in other words. I've been told I was on the road to hell, but I had no idea it was just a mile down the road with a dome on it. Now that is awesome. I'm going to repeat that because everybody knew this is today's statement. I've been told I was on the road to hell, but I had no idea it was just a mile down the road with a dome on it. Yes, that's sweet. If you once forfeit the confidence of your fellow citizens, you can never regain their respect and esteem. It is true that you may fool all of the people some of the time. You can even fool some of the people all of the time. But you can't fool all of the people all the time. And that is the last quote I have from Abraham. And I have other presidents, but you know what? His birthday was the nearest. I remember back when it was President's Day, and I think Washington. What's Washington? And it was a different when I was a kid in grade school. You'd get President's Day off for Washington's birthday, and then you'd get it for Lincoln's birthday, and they kept trying to create new holidays. So that people wouldn't have to go to school, and they would everybody'd get a holiday off. Well, George Washington was born February 22 of 1732, and he died December 12 of 1799. First president from 1789 to 1797. He's a Federalist, and I'll give you one quote from him, just because. Labor to keep alive in your heart that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. And that is the name of that tune. Now, I brought with me, too, I bought this at a Chinese festival that I went to. It was really cool. They used to, at the St. Louis, I forget what it's called, is it the St. Louis Botanical Garden, the somebody Botanical Garden? I forget who the important people were that owned it, but I'm a member still at the Botanical Garden. It's one of my favorite things to do. I like to go there. And I used to be, they would have this Chinese festival, and I went to it a couple of years, and then I went to it a third, fourth year, and it turned to some cosplay thing, and everybody's wandering around in like little kids dressed up as Pokemon. It was weird. It was totally different. But the first couple of times, it was all art, all culture. It was really cool. And the Botanical Garden has some very good shows up there. Anyway, I bought some art. Some really cool embroidered stitch work that was of this huge stork. Rice patties. I mean, it was really cool, and I still have them somewhere, but I banged up the frame some, and I've got to get them repaired, but those are probably worth some money these days. There's a former state rep who stole my I'm 90% certain it was him. You know, the Sylvie's his name. He took he took a photo. I used to buy artwork, and this one magically disappeared when his wife stole everything in my office as well. And there was a picture of the signing of the capitulation between Grant and Lee. You know, the signing of the papers, surrender documents. And going forward, and it was it was an oil painting. It was really nice. It was original, and it was nice. And I got the certificate of authenticity, bought it at some charity thing, and he coveted that thing every time he saw it in my office. And I left for a bit, and the guy snatched it. I know it was him. So if anybody knows Sylvie, and he's got it hanging in his office, somebody snatch it and give it to me because it's mine. And, but anyway, I also had in my office, because I bought at the Chinese festival as I got distracted by artwork. At the Chinese festival, I bought something that a little red book that the Chinese carried around with them. For there are hundreds of millions of these things running around China, and they still remake them. They sell them in shops, and it's the same thing. And it's called Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, and here it is. I'm not going to read any quotes to it. It's President's Day. I'm not. But I forgot. I had this cool little book. I've been setting up my office and had these crates of books. And I had a couple. So I'll give you one more ridiculous story. I had a copy of a book in my office, and I would. It was on my. I would leave it out while clients were waiting to come in and speak to me. I would have little books out on the table. And, like this presidential wit and wisdom and my, I wouldn't put the Chairman Mao out there. It's probably a bad deal. Or put my Soviet Union flags and stuff that I collected over the years out there. That's a bad plan in your American office. But I put out there a book called How to Be a Gentleman. How to Be a Gentleman. And it had little things like that. That you would go to a different page and it'd say, a gentleman does thusly, and you'd put it. It was an old book. It was a cool book. It was a new version of an old book that how to train to be a gentleman. And it was a historic little book. So one day, I said, well, you know what? I said, one of my kids or somebody was in there. I was like, go get that book, How to Be a Gentleman. And, you need to study up on some of that because obviously I have failed you as a son. And go get that book and read it. He goes out, the book's not there. And somebody stole my How to Be a Gentleman book. And you'd sit there and go, now, how in the world can you steal a book about how to become a gentleman if it's based in theft of stealing the book? Yeah, that's going to work, isn't it? Anyway, I'm truly all over the map as usual, and it's only Monday. Geez, what's going to happen with the rest of the week? Well, the important news of the weekend, of the last several days, in fact, is the Munich Security Conference. And this Munich Security Conference, notably absent, in my humble opinion, was the old Trumpster. But you could argue that he was at Davos and he gave that speech that pretty offensive to the rest of the world leaders, in my humble opinion, coming in. He's looked at more and more as a domineering sort of emperor of the world. People are talking about how his new global order is one emperor. No longer is there even a consensus between NATO or not even NATO, but the EU leaders and Trump, and the U.S. president, who control the UN. They control the markets. They control the IMF. They control the World Bank. They control all the flow of money. They decide, they all talk about the rules-based order, but the rules never apply to them. That group, okay? Now, the big complaint is that instead of it being that group, of ne'er-do-wells who just seize power and tell the rest of the world what to do, but at least it was dominated. It was dominated by the U.S., but they sometimes pretended to listen to other countries and the leaders of other countries. Now, we don't even do that. We have Marco Rubio go out on Trump's behalf and dictate to the world what the world is going to hear. We seize Venezuela. We threaten to take Greenland. We tell Canada, put up or shut up, and there is no longer... The trouble with a corporate raider is he will always be a corporate raider. Now, there's a great deal of respect I have for the corporate raider. That's capitalism, friends and neighbors, and more power to them. But sometimes in the political world, it doesn't go the same. Do I think Trump will be seen as a great president in the future? Will people be reading quotes from the old Trumpster on a radio program? How many years? It was 1865, 160 years after his death, and say, here was a guy you can read commentary from? I don't know. I think that he's done some fantastic things. I truly wish he would stay looking inward and not try to take over the world. I don't like the methods. Some of the results are not so horrible. I despise what he has done in Venezuela. I think it was BS by any stretch. And Rubio went and pushed that same sales button, trying to float a narrative. It's only a narrative. Just because he's a Republican and it may have worked out well for the United States doesn't mean it's not a narrative. It is. And narco-terrorism, that's why you did it. It was the drug. You're trying to save the people of America. Yeah, right. You're stealing oil. That's what you're doing. And you're stealing it from who? From China. Why? Because you're the big dog on the block, and China put $100 billion in there, and you can steal it without really stealing it. And that's what we've done. And we, being the United States, I think is wrong. It's improper. And if we do anything like that in Greenland, it's going to be the exact same. Wrong. Okay? And on this President's Day, I think we should think about that. And what I wanted to do was go back to... So 1991. So the I forget what year the Munich Munich Security Conference began. I want to say like 62, 63. It came up. And what was the big alleged threat at that time? So after World War II, history in World War II was that after that, now Germany was the enemy. Germany stayed. We like to say it was one man. It was only Hitler. That ain't true, friends and neighbors. They supported him, and they were all over it. And when it was done, they all wiped their hands. Oh, no, it wasn't me. The people who don't say anything but go along to get along, right? And they go along in a serious way to take over the world. Don't tell me Hitler did it all by himself. Oh, yeah. He did it all by himself. It was a bad society. But what did they do immediately afterward? Immediately. They knew that Russia they wiped out the Soviet army. But what have we been pumping ever since? If it wasn't for America, Hitler would have won. That's not true. Would have taken longer, but he was on his heels anyway. And he was on his heels due to 26 million Soviet losses. Okay, and he was on his heels. He was gonna be overrun either way, and we came in at the end and helped mop up, and then took all of the credit, and then realized that, oh, by the way, the power in Europe is no longer Germany. Is no longer Spain, no longer France, not remotely England. It's Russia. And they are going to come. And so what did we do? We created an enemy out of them. And so the Security Conference in Munich came up and immediately began, as had already been going on for nearly 20 years since the end of the Second World War. A new enemy. The new enemy? Russia. The new enemy, the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union didn't start that war, but that's what people like to think. Who was demonized after World War II? Russia. The USSR. They're the demons, right? They gave... What did they do? Except defend themselves all the way and defeat the army. They took a stand and defeated the Nazi army. And all the way, defeated the Germans. And we helped at the end. I'm not claiming we didn't have a big role in it, creating a second front. But there was no front without the Americans. That's true. That front was long dead. And the Germans knew it. Everybody knew it. And when we came in and took the slaughters that they took on the Normandy beaches and whatnot, that it was definitely a turning point. But it was a turning point in creating a second front, not in winning the war. So check your history if you don't believe that. Anyway, the Munich Security Conference started, has always been, this is going to sound terrible, but it's always been. My history of listening to it began in the 90s. And, I pay attention to it. I always, see the notable speeches, stuff like that. It's easier these days because you can just watch the speeches. It was kind of hard to get them before. You couldn't really do it. But now, in today's fingertips, everything's at your disposal. You can listen to the full speech of Rubio without having to hunt for a week to find it. You can find 20 different versions or 20 different people trying to get clicks online from it, by uploading it. Always go to the official one if at all possible. I listened to the one from the Secretary of State's website. Is the one I'm at. Mm-hmm. So the backdrop of the Munich Security Conference has always been, historically, the exact same every year. People get there and they talk about, where we're going, what the big threat is. The big threat's always Russia. And what are we going to do? Build more weapons, build more armies. We're going to take care of ourselves. U.S. is going to dominate. We're going to take care of, whoever's there that gets invited. They stopped inviting Russia. So now it is no conference on security. It's a place to get together in glad hand. And to some respects, it's always been that way. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this is I very much enjoy on Sunday nights putting on in the background while doing whatever it is I'm doing. Last night it was cleaning the kitchen, but I was listening to, in the background, the TV, and Vladimir Solovyov, his great political program that I really like to watch. And it's the format that they speak of. And Solovyov is obviously pro-Russia, but they got to talking about it. And so I had already heard Rubio's speech and was thinking of how crap it was. And I was like, man, that's it? That's your commentary? And I was less than impressed by that. It's like, all right, well, geez, why don't we just roll out George Bush and Dick Cheney 2.0 and call it Marco Rubio? We're doing the same thing. And, and everybody got together. The focus this time in Munich was, and Munich's a beautiful city, Hofbrauhaus there. I had some good times there. And I just love Munich. I love Bavaria. I'm Bavarian, for God's sake, Austrian. And so my family's German-Austrian. And so from that area, in fact. And so I love that area. And I love the culture. I love all of that. It'd be great if I got to go every year and see some Bavaria. And I think half of the time, that's all they're going for. They aren't doing anything legitimate except getting together and yanking each other's Johnsons. That's it. They get together and, oh, geez, life is great, isn't it? Boy, look what we're doing. We're here taking over the world. Pinky, how's it going? And you just, it's the same old crap every single year. It was only entertaining in 2 of the last 20, 30 years. The rest has all been the same platitudes, the same, oh, geez, the rules-based order. Oh, gee, globalism. Dick Cheney gets there. We're gonna take over the world. We're gonna spend more money on weapons, on defense. We got the military in Europe. The same old crap. This is defense, a la America, right? Running NATO, running the world, in fact. And so they just don't invite the people they don't want to be there. So they didn't invite Russia. They didn't invite Iran this year. China was invited, but fringe. they're not put in. And I got a little bit to report on him. And it just it's supposed to be a security conference, and it's not. And who pointed that out? Seriously. Now, we all knew it anyway. We knew it was where it's another political boondoggle where they get together and spend money and congratulate each other on being in charge. That's what they're doing. And they're, oh, geez, we're in charge and this is great. And, well, let's talk about, I watched afterward. And before I do an analysis of two notable speeches, which I intend to do quickly, I want to go through some commentary on that because, like I said, doing dishes, cleaning the kitchen, putting away some crap finally that has been sitting in packing boxes for a long time. Had to get rid of it. I was listening to Vladimir Solovyov and company, and his format, I've told you about it before, but the format I just love. And I love the format. And I also love that he sometimes gets out of control. And he did this time. He was yelling about, he calls them bad names in Russian. I get all of my bad names from Solovyov, where I get to learn how to say certain evil things in Russian. And no, that's not true. But some of it's from the movies. But he's pretty brutal, and he was pretty brutal about the security conference. And so when Solovyov opened his program, he wasn't improvising. The structure was, he's like a prosecutor, right? He didn't begin with troop movements, in Ukraine or the most recent battlefield. For me, I thought this was all self-congratulatory, Ukraine-heavy stuff once again. We're right back in it. And Rubio was right in the middle of it. All it is we're pumping more war, this time in Ukraine, right? But Solovyov began with 1991 in his analysis. And that choice alone reveals the framework he wants the audience to listen to. The present cannot be understood, according to him, and I agree with this, without the collapse of the Soviet Union and the geopolitical retreat that followed. He reminds viewers that Russia did not fight to preserve the Warsaw Pact. And that's true, too. They were told, well, we'll get, you know what, I'm only going to stay with what the summary of their argument on this political show in Russian, right? He reminded them, everyone, that Eastern Europe didn't require liberation or war to detach itself from Moscow. He emphasized that Soviet forces withdrew from East Germany and Central Europe without demanding occupation zones, retaliatory alliances, anything like that. They allowed Hitler's Germany to reunify peacefully. Now, think about that. Would it be the same if, say, the democratic order in Europe had collapsed? Would it be that way? Would West Germany have been allowed to unite with East Germany if the roles were reversed? Clearly, no. Oh, geez, no. You can't do that. We're democracies. Those Russians, they weren't democracies. That was the Soviet Union, right? Germany was allowed by Russia with Russian and Warsaw Pact consent when George Bush I said, let this happen and we in NATO won't expand an inch to the east. That those are true events. They happened. And the Russians said, all right, we'll trust you. And can we be, maybe we can economically push, right? The Cold War ended without a continental bloodbath. There was no bloodbath. His argument is simple but powerful. Russia stepped back. Now, Russia didn't necessarily have to. They still had a very strong military. They had 300,000 forces in East Germany, for God's sake. And, we had the similar thing. They were de-escalating. Nobody could afford that. We kept on going anyway and let Poland come in. Think about this. Who else was allowed to do whatever they wanted afterward? Is that capitulation? Are you going to say, oh, but they lost. They didn't have the ability. Maybe in the 90s they didn't have the ability. But it doesn't, just because we didn't act according to what we said we would, treaty or no treaty, doesn't mean that it was justified. Doesn't mean we didn't do it. Because Putin asked, Clinton and several others if they could join, and it was told no, could be part of NATO. They tried to be there. So there's a lot of memory of this on the other side of the world. Trust me, they don't trust us, nor should they, because everything we say is platitudes and stuff like that from Rubio or similar at the Munich Security Conferences. And so the argument is simple. Russia stepped back, and from that premise flows a huge grievance, a huge root cause of Ukraine today. NATO stepping forward 9 to 13 times, depending on how you calculate it. They stepped forward and continued to trample on what we said we'd never do, but what they said they would never do. So later talks about encroachment, collapse to enlargement. Reciprocity is denied. He frames the 90s not as Russian aggression, but Russian accommodation. And that's true. You could argue, well, they couldn't do anything. So what did we do? We pressed our advantage. We took advantage, for sure, economically and otherwise. He suggests a Western alliance interpreted the Soviet collapse not as an opportunity to design an inclusive security architecture, but as an opening to extend its military bloc eastward. All true. Now, historians can argue about what was promised in 1990. Some will say that informal assurances were made about NATO not moving 1 inch eastward. Others insist that no binding agreement existed. But the argument of the Russians bears certain repeating. You don't have to have a treaty for people to have an institutional memory of what was said. And Bush 1 truly said, not 1 inch eastward. And he said that. And our leaders, their words don't matter. They're lawyers afterward and go, well, geez, we said that, but that was posturing. That was positioning. That was, what is Trump's, the art of the deal. That's the art of the deal. It's the Russians that were stupid for not forcing that into a treaty. Why would you have to if it's publicly stated by a member of the chief member, really, of the Western Alliance? So it's not about treaty language, it's about perception. Trust is not built on signed documents, it's built on expectations. And those expectations were definitely violated. Enlargement, NATO expanded in 1999 to include Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic. In 2004, the Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia. Later expansions continue, and each move represents the ratchet turning one direction only. He emphasizes geography. He references maps. He talks about the buffer territories now as an alliance. He talks about the Poles putting air bases in Romania. In all the crap that the Soviets did in the Eastern Bloc, Warsaw Pact countries, the UN is doing in the other way to make sure that Russia stays an enemy. And they're obviously in 2004, they're courting Georgia and Ukraine. They said they will be members. They said it. Just, screw you. They're going to be. And so his first crew of panelists, the way the show goes, is that it's 3.5 hours long, and they have 2 sets of panelists. And so 8 guys that get in the room, and they each get to go around the room and say their piece. So the first panelist, they reinforced this interpretation. They referenced 2008 Bucharest. Oh, it was 2008. I'm sorry, not 2004, where NATO declared that Ukraine and Georgia will eventually become members. That declaration transformed what had been theoretical expansion to a direct signal that Russia's immediate neighborhood was in play. They're trying to surround the old Soviet Union, the old satellites of Soviet Union, with old members of the Soviet Union itself, not Poland, not I don't know, Romania, but Georgia, which was part of the Soviet Union, Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union. They signaled, we're coming, we're taking those countries from you. And so Moscow interprets that membership promise as a warning rather than a gesture. Russia wasn't going to be invited. They've been told you're not invited, but we'll take everybody else. So it's important to understand this perspective, even if you disagree with its conclusion. It links expansion, declarations, reaction, and continuous chain of events. The continuity is what Solovyov was talking about. And so then he pivots to 2014. But I want to pivot. He pivoted to the facts surrounding Ukraine, which they lie about even today. Even the NATO Secretary General gets on there yesterday or over the weekend at the Munich Security Conference, says absolutely no reasons at all for the invasion, he calls it, of the Donbass by Russia. No provocations of any kind is what he said. Nonsense. And paraphrasing, of course, but that's what he said. And I think I have the quote further in my materials here, but that is crap. People want to still forget that Ukraine itself was bombing its own 2 territories in the Donbass, Lugansk and Donetsk. It was bombing the crap out of them from 2014 after Maidan, which was staged by the West to get rid of Yanukovych. And none of this would have happened if we hadn't interfered there. That's true. The likelihood is slim that it would have happened because Yanukovych was more centrally not against Russia, not against NATO. He wanted to be more neutral. And no, that can't be. We need Ukraine. Ukraine will be a part of NATO. They were just pressuring Russia. That's how it goes. So if one accepts these characterizations, the conflict was treated not as an insurgency, as civil war, which it was. Ukrainian artillery strikes in the east are described as Kyiv bombing its own populations. Civilian casualties are constant. They're killing their own people. The Minsk Accords that they put together for de-escalation, they weren't implemented with the intent to honor them. They were put in to delay and give them time to build up with more Western weapons and defeat these republics who had already voted they were in succession trying to ease out of Ukraine. They've been trying it forever, since 2014. They declared their own independence. They didn't want a governor from there. The Minsk Agreement said that they could put in, that a governor could be put in, could be a government that was not appointed by the head of Ukraine. Like all other governors, that they could have some autonomy, kind of like Transnistria and Moldova, where that person's not appointed by the central government. Anyway, they glad hand all of this, and they beat up on it. So Munich this year was dominated by Ukraine again. So here we are, we're back to it. The panel revolved around support packages, air defense systems, sanctions, alliance, NATO unity. The language was, again, moral, declarative. There's no inclusiveness of any kind. There's no discussion of anything except Russia's an aggressor. This war started in 2022. It's all unilateral. Ukraine's defending itself only, and NATO is the guarantor of stability. Even Rubio gets on there. You guys got to take care of yourself, but we're with you, and he talks about mistakes. So the NATO Secretary General's remarks were clear and uncompromising, too. He said there was absolutely no justification for Russia's invasion. He's nuts, but he emphasized deterrence, sanctions, and sustained military assistance. That's what he wants. Deterrence, sanctions, and more military assistance for Ukraine. Let them all die, basically. They're still talking, including Rubio, about what? Rules-based order. They're not rules-based. It's really not even order, but it's certainly not rules-based, because rules apply to everyone, and these don't. And then the necessity of resisting aggression, unless it's our aggression. Rubio talking about aggression resistance after just going in and slaughtering or stealing the king of Venezuela, the leader of Venezuela. So this we're right back to political dog whistles. That's it. So the critique, I'm much more for it. So I want to talk about two speeches, compare Rubio's. So I pay attention to this Munich Security Conference, right? And the Security Conference in 2007 is one of my favorites. And because the looks on the faces of Cheney and company when Vladimir Putin stood, and Vladimir Putin has always been a well-spoken person. And he's a former KGB, speaks German fluently. He is not against saying some pretty snippy things on the stage. So he's always somebody worth watching. He's certainly no Trump. He isn't. He isn't needlessly. I don't know what, demonizing and he doesn't or offensive to people. He's not that. That's one thing I can't stand about Trump. At least be diplomatic in your takedowns of people. And he's just, no, you're an idiot. That's basically it. Well, you're just dumb. Yeah, that's helpful. So let's talk about this. Putin's 2007 speech at Munich was much different than the typical everybody get together and yank each other's wieners. This is where the rails didn't hold the train. And I thought about that entire speech. It's a half an hour long. There are English versions of it out there, and you should go and watch it, what he said, because everything he said has come to pass. All of it. And it's come to pass. He talked about it all. He argued that the unipolar system, one center of power and decision-making, is unstable. He warned that unilateral actions create insecurity. He asked against whom NATO expansion is directed. Straight up. He goes, who's the enemy? Where is this enemy? That's 2007, by the way. He said plainly that no one feels safe in a system where force is selectively applied, which it is. I gave what do you call it, show about the king of several different places in there. Go to Serbia. Told me that's well run, by and this is what was actually floated about Ukraine recently, is NATO supervision. Yeah, there's a good idea. Who gets to run it? At the time, in 2007, Western observers dismissed his warnings as rhetorical posturing. They assumed NATO expansion is defensive and welcomed by the new member states seeking security. And they viewed Russia's objections as residual imperialistic sentiment. But architecture doesn't exist in abstraction. It exists in what the perception is. If one side perceives expansion as defensive and the other perceives it as encirclement, that's obviously going to create a friction. If your goal is to take Georgia, Armenia, all the former southern Soviet republics, they approach Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all of which I've seen, and you still see it, that there's a lot of that. Try to get them into NATO. They're East Asia, for God's sake. At North Atlantic Treaty Organization, yeah, what's that for? Defeat of Russia, period, the end. So that friction is really, in Russia's view, incremental provocation. Western leaders are, of course, forgetful. They only stick around 4 years at a time. Munich is unwilling to revisit 2007, not because the speech itself lacked merit, but because acknowledging its arguments about the structure itself would require reconsidering expansion and what they did, whether it was wrong or not, and whether continuing to do so is still wrong. It's a worldview that I do not support. I don't support the idea that the world is at war and all we need to do is continue military actions all over the planet. In order to save the world, we start wars all over the place. Yeah, that's what we're doing. The war in Ukraine, we certainly helped that, didn't we? 1.5 million guys dead or wounded in Ukraine. We're very helpful, right? And billions upon billions, hundreds of billions spent for nothing, for zip, just so Western arms manufacturers can get rich. So let's talk about historical memory, because between 1991 and 2022, the European security map, if you want to call NATO security, changed dramatically. Military alliances expanded. Political unions were much deeper. Missile defense systems by the Polish have been put all over the place. Sanction regimes have become layered. Iran's been under sanctions forever, right? Energy dependency patterns, were evolved, and nobody liked the fact that they were paying Russia. Each of these developments have altered strategic calculation. And Trump wants to own the energy infrastructure of the planet because he knows infrastructure is what keeps it all together years to come. So if Munich refuses to debate those cumulative changes, it reinforces the perception that it prefers affirmation, self-affirmation, over introspective review of what really should happen. They never discuss any of that. It's just bad Putin, bad Russia, good Zelensky. And Zelensky was there, same old crap. Hand out, oh, geez, we need more money, we need it faster. We need more arms, we need it faster. Our people are dying, but, they're brave. Yeah, they're real brave as they die. Solovyov, talks about the skepticism, not just of Russia, but of me. I'm not Russian. I'm a realist. I think that Russia has some guilt here too. It doesn't mean we don't on the West. The Western globalists don't. I mean, Trump's still trying to extricate himself, not because of anything other than he cannot bring peace. I'll get peace in a day. He didn't get his Nobel Prize. Now he doesn't care about it anymore. The old sour grapes theory right there. Well, I didn't want that anyway. So let's start some more war. Let's take over Greenland. I know. China and Russia are trying to take over Greenland, right? We got to go in there. So 5 European. Did you hear about this? Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't want to jump through my to my next topic. I really need to get to the two analysis of the peace by force, and that kind of thing, because I wanted to look at the two quotes between. I had a comparison of quotes that what I did was I re-listened to Vladimir Putin, and I listened to Rubio yesterday, and it's telling, because this is the same old on the West. We talk about rules-based order. We talk about Ukraine being brave, just like so. Last year was a bit different. You had Vance go out there, and he had a pretty good appearance at the security conference, beat up on a bunch of the Europeans at that time. Here, Rubio was a little bit lighter. Rubio was still saying you need to do more, but he wasn't as well spoken as last year Vance was. And he did the same old thing, talking about the evil party. But he did say that we had made all kinds of mistakes in the rules-based order, that we never really applied it, just like Carney did at his speech at Davos a month and a half ago, or whenever that was. And I found that to be interesting, that Rubio would admit it. And I think the fact that he is admitting it is more necessary at this point, because you can't hide the fact that we didn't do what we said we were going to do. It didn't happen. And it's funny, because if you analyze what China said yesterday, or not yesterday, at the conference, it's funny because they are saying something similar to, and they're calm and they're diplomatic about it, and they're not pushing narratives that China's good and morally right, and they're not doing that. All this entire security conference was for a group of people to get around, self-congratulate themselves, each other, and yank each other's wieners, and talk about how wonderful it is that rules-based order, we need to get back to that, globalist tendency, because we're the good guys. Yeah. Meanwhile, China is funding ports run by India in Iran. Right? BRICS is settling. Do you know there was an allegation yesterday that China, the yuan, is now up to 10%. Now, that's not accurate. It's really only about 5%. And if you go through in what the settlements are. But BRICS trade, which is around 40% nationally, but they're smaller amounts because all of it still goes through the West, and Europe and Canada and the U.S. still control most of the markets. But the foreign systems, the other systems, the yuan heavy, the rupee heavy, the ruble heavy, are being traded in national currency directly between each other to the exclusion of the dollar. So it's definitely ongoing, and it's definitely expanding, and it's the margins that are going to take away the ability of the U.S. to dominate the way it is, as I talked about in one of the shows last week. So, meanwhile, India is staying out of this unipolar world stuff. All of the other parts of the world, especially Southeast Asia, are building logistics chains with, and what do you think was the big deal in Venezuela? Logistics chains, infrastructure built by China, which Trump realizes is not in favor of hegemony of the U.S., and it's against the dollar, it's against the market, it's against all those things. That's why. It's not narco-terrorism, friends and neighbors. It's not blowing up a couple of boats on the water. It's, oh my God, that's $100 billion they put in Venezuela. We can't lose South America. We're supposed to dominate South America. And so we start a war. It's a short one, but we started it. And we seized a member. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is building ports. We can't build new ports. What do we got going on? They're expanding digital architecture. They're modernizing their rail systems. India especially. India isn't choosing sides. They're not doing it. They're doing what's best for them. They're choosing material leverage. That's what they're doing. And so these things are important. Meanwhile, in Munich, what's in Munich? Unity, we're all in unity, beat up Putin. Moral outrage. Oh my God, Putin invaded in 2022. They skipped the bombings and destruction of their own people from 2014 to 2022, and they skipped Minsk and all that other stuff. Say, we got to test Putin further. We got to put more sanctions out there. 20 packages already. We need a 21st. More weapons. We got to modernize our weapons, get ready for war with Russia by 2030. And it's always democracy, democracy, democracy. Very little about rebuilding the European manufacturing that's been gone, sent to China. Industrial energy competitiveness, they're paying, according to Sachs, 6 times the amount that they ought to be for energy because they're buying it from the U.S. and not from Russia. They're blowing up pipelines. And doing zero investigation. Although, did you hear that Navalny was killed by frog dart poison that came from Ecuador? I can't remember. Ecuadorian frog dart poison is what killed Alexei Navalny. And who did it? Vladimir Putin. And who discovered it? A group of people who got it all wrong in several other cases similar in England, an English research facility. Checked it out and said that Navalny was killed. And they said, well, you didn't have access to the body. He's buried in Russia. You got nothing. And you don't even have reports. You have no... Well, samples of... swabs that were taken from his cell after he died and smuggled out of Russia were sent to this lab in England, and the lab in England determined that Navalny was killed by frog dart poison Vladimir Putin imported somehow from Ecuador or wherever the hell it was in South America. And so, yeah, you can't, in 2-3 years, you can figure out that a guy whose body you didn't examine was killed by frog dart poison, but you can't figure out who was involved in destroying the Severny Potok 2, Nord Stream 2. You can't tell me that. You have no idea, who bombed the Crocus. You have no idea any sort of attempts on. You can't postulate on who's trying to kill generals in Russia, and if those are done by Ukraine, you can hide all of that crap. But by God, you can find out that Navalny, the Democrat, that Navalny, the Democrat, was killed by Putin with frog dart poison. Yeah, that's unity, friends and neighbors. But excuse me, you can't dominate geopolitics with think tanks, press conferences, and making crap up as you go along, like Navalny was killed by frog dart poison. That's a joke just thinking about it. Power is concrete, steel, semiconductors, and shipping lanes. And we get together and talk about moral right. We're going to be sitting, we're a democracy. We're democracy. Crazy stuff, and we're winding down to the end of the show here. Munich talks about rules-based order. China, even at the Munich conference, nobody else talked about it. They talked about ports. Munich talking about unity. We got to stand with Ukraine. India's building rail systems. Munich talks about punishing Russia, more sanctions. Russia builds corridors to the east with its allies. Munich talks about values. Half the world is talking about the loss of energy security. I'm not saying that because I'm anti-West. I'm not. That's a comparative reality. It's I don't know. Why are we sitting around debating morality? Why don't we debate reality instead of who's who? We have diplomatic contrast, certainly, between India, Russia, China, Brazil, and anyone in the West. They talk about infrastructure. They talk about the system itself and how the system of what they are, of the way it is run, needs to be revamped. Even Rubio said we need to rebuild the system. But he doesn't want to build it for anybody else. He wants to restructure it so it remains dominant the way it was before. And the more they push toward that, the more people are going to fight against it. Do you like being told what to do, or do you like being brought along? That's the question. So the structural critique, I suggest strongly that you go back and listen to their versions on YouTube where they'll translate it for you, or you can follow along and read it, but you should watch his mannerisms. And he was pretty brutal in 2007. Not brutal. He was, it wasn't even confrontational. It was more realistic. You know, here you are expanding NATO and acting as if there are no consequences to your one-size-fits-all category of rule. It's a good speech. And then you can listen to Rubio's yesterday, the same old platitudes. And I challenge you, what you could do is you could go out and take Rubio's speech and play it next to Cheney's speech in 2007, for example, or any other notable speech by a U.S. Foreign Services guy. And have it and see if there's any difference. I mean, we're just rephrasing the same old crap that we've been phrasing for years. And the rest of the world is talking about how that phrasing and framing of issues as being just rules-based order, which nobody has to follow except people you dislike. You know, we select who. It's like a judge in a criminal court, you know, allowing money to, well, maybe not a judge, but it's a fact. You know, money can buy you justice that you're never going to get from the public defender. You know, that's reality. It's unfortunate, but true. And the system is what needs to be fought, not the fact that any particular public defender is bad or any particular judge. They're not. They're in the system that they've been presented. And if the system you're presenting is a domineering, alleged rules-based order, and all you have is the moral right, all you can do is pump the moral right. And that's all we've been doing for 30 years, and 35, 34, whatever it was, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's it. Moral theater. Oh, we won, and look at us. It's a rules-based order. People are tired of it. When are you going to fix a structure? When are you going to propose something different that isn't we say, you do? And that's that. Anyway, that's the show for today. It's been international flavor. I got plenty to talk about this week because it's a wealth of information from the Munich Security Conference once again, and from the nonsense that was spouted off in general there. I got some notable quotes this week. The old Z Monster was there, hat in hand, begging for more crap. And meanwhile, things are going poorly in Ukraine. Samuel Trapp, International Flavor, internationalflavor.com. All of our shows are available at damradio.com/podcast as well. And you can listen to me live here every morning from 7:30 to 9. in Central Time. And you can now listen to civicoutlaws.com come Friday. Have a very nice day. Glad you joined in.